It's not very often that you see such an interesting 24 hours with very little stock movement, but in today's video, we need to discuss everything to do with stocks, commodities, and cryptos moving forward into December. November was an amazing month, and of course, we've seen a melt up across the board, but the dark pool transactions were getting absolutely wild over the last 24 hours, and in particular, there was a huge focus on what's going on with big technology such as the Magnificent Seven, semiconductors, and of course, the equal weighted market. It looks like we just got a huge rotation circle, but at the same time, weakness could be on the horizon coming into this month. Stay tuned as we cover everything you need to look out for. Well, welcome back everybody to the daily show that we've been running for over 3 years together. My name's Tom, and today we're covering the macro, the lead indicators, and the hottest charts together. But first off, I want to talk about everything that happened in the terms of structure. Nvidia and Google were down, as was Tesla into the Cybertruck event. But more importantly, it was rotation across the board. Look at the greens versus the reds. This is the second day now that we've seen this occurring, and it brings us into an incredibly important point for the December stats that you're about to see. Along with that, sentiment is changing and it's getting pretty wild. Greed was reading up to 66, but it's the survey reports that we just came in with that are really, really big. And of course, just a quick reminder as well, if you haven't already subscribe to our VIP free weekly newsletter. We're covering 5 charts this weekend that you need to be watching, and I've looked out over a few thousand of them as well to bring you these hot ones. So make sure to subscribe, name, email, it's that easy. So we just had a pretty damn great November, and obviously we've had a very strong year so far. So what does that mean for December? Well, here's where things change a little bit. If we roll into December, we often see a bit of early month weakness into late month strength. Maybe that Santa rally is coming this year, but it could be a little tumultuous before that point. Let's discuss 1st of December. Of course, that's happening here this Friday. Well, it turns out the stats are not actually very good for December the 1st. It turns out that's only 36.4% of the time are the markets up. Now, if you know anything about markets, you would know they generally are way more bullish than bearish. So to have a 36 stat certainly makes you start thinking. And when you go through the structure, which we will be today, it starts to make you wonder whether we are actually going to see this pullback for the start of December. Here's where everything begins. This is a significant shift. This is the Mag 7, so the Magnificent 7 stocks. And what just happened then was we saw the first 7 stock negative outflow which we have had for over 30 days. Now, this is across the board on all of the Mag 7 stocks, and it could either be a series of rotations or it could also be the beginning of a bit more of a sell-off, a bit more of a nasty surprise. So the Mag 7 broke its support, it fell down, and now when it rallies, if it does, you'd have to think there's sellers trying to push this thing down a little bit. Now, we've talked about it being a fairly shallow kind of pullback, and one of the things that you could be looking at as well is going to be the dollar index or the US dollar. This is a stat that we stated that has really occurred since October the 3rd. The dollar started to weaken, and on that exact day, we started to see huge rallies across the board on pretty much everything that was risk on. You can see here that silver has been performing the best against the dollar since that point. But as we mentioned in the previous video, we did start to see dollar strength, and it was actually a pretty good day trade. Some serious strength coming through the market back in to show the dollar hasn't quite been killed yet. However, there are several big resistance points we'll look at later on. So why could this market potentially still struggle to go down? Well, here's where I think things get really interesting. The Dow was actually up for the session, showing that rotation, but retail went to an 85% bearish position throughout the session. That is crazy. Like 85% bearish position. Of course, what happened? A big giant green candle that was sent to crush everybody's hopes and dreams. Now, we don't have the stat on the NASDAQ, which is kind of upsetting, but we do know that the SPY is 65% bearish, and the DAX has been dropping bearish position a little bit recently, with the FTSE increasing bearish position, and of course, it was also rallying a little bit on the session. Let's go over to sentiment reports. Some other big stats coming through. The most bullish reading in 16 weeks and the most bearish low reading, so this is basically hibernation reading for the bears, since June of 2021. Yeah, it's been a while since we've been so low in terms of where the bears are sitting. Now, it's not necessarily that we're instantly going to sell, but that's starting to get up there in euphoria. 4 strong weeks in a row, one of the biggest swaps we've ever seen from bear to bull positions, and of course, sentiment approaching the peak. So I think in most recent reports, we're probably up here in terms of investor sentiment, starting to get into that point where you're going to say, well, maybe I need to be really cautious about these markets. Now, in terms of what's going on from the corporate side, the insider side, as we mentioned, XLP, XLV, and XLK are all seeing pretty strong corporate insider buying. And in general, nobody's really trying to sell their positions from the insider perspective. Now, that's interesting because, of course, we've already seen a point where we're basically going towards new highs, and we are already in new highs. Now, traditionally, they've been correct over a longer term. So it doesn't mean that markets can't pull back first. Of course, they can, and we'll be looking for something like that. But they are fairly bullish on 2024. Should they know? Well, they are the insiders after all. Also, remember that insiders across the board have been buying. We went to a 0.54 ratio, which is the highest in 6 months. So again, it's pointing towards this whole Fed pivot idea. That is that they're going to stop raising the rates and start cutting them is probably going to come to fruition. At least that's what everybody's starting to believe. And it's a huge reason why I've been rallying. What might surprise you, though, is when we look at the central bank indicator a little bit later on, we've actually seen a huge reduction in the amount of, let's say, stimulus that's out there. And it's been pulling back pretty fast over the last 24 hours. Now, I mentioned that this chart was really big. For the crypto fans out there, this is a pretty interesting one because it shows you that the gains before the halving event versus the after halving event are hugely different. Now, as this market has matured over the years, you can't be expecting a 93 times anymore, but I encourage you to go and have a look at that chart just so you can start to get a bit of an idea of how big a thing Bitcoin halving is. And of course, that's coming in 2024. It's a huge reason why I think that crypto is doing quite well at this stage. S&P 500 performance before and after huge winning streaks. I've put this in every single day just to kind of show us why this melt up is occurring. Now, remember, this is an S&P 500 stat, so it doesn't mean that the NASDAQ couldn't fall off. And even then, what we're really saying is that in general, the pullbacks are shallower. So at this stage, because of this huge bullish sentiment we've seen across the board and the increase in breadth over the last 24 hours, whatever does come back, you would have to think there's probably going to be a buyer somewhere around, at least for now, until something breaks, which we do expect is going to occur. In terms of what's going on with the Russell 2000, it's sitting still in here, basically coiling around. In general, the Russell takes a while to pick off, so it usually happens sometime around the middle of December in similar years, such as what we've seen so far. This is also another stat just showing the best 4 months for the Russell tend to be that December, Jan, Feb period. So something to keep in the back of your mind if you are looking at strong price action in the future. Now, we mentioned that across the board, central banks are loosening, and in general, they have been loosening. They're loosening policy. They're doing rate cuts throughout other places in the world, but the Federal Reserve still hasn't joined them yet, although it seems likely they will. So when they do rate cut, what does that mean? Well, of the last 14 times, 11 of them have been hard resets or full recessions. And generally, a recession is going to give you a pretty nasty stat. What that stat is that we tend to sell off, and we actually sometimes average, I think it's over 20% sell, with most of these sells actually lasting into the 180 days. Now, you might be a believer in the idea of a soft landing, but in general, these are the kind of positions that happen. Trading days from first Fed rate cut to S&P 500 market low. In every one except for 1980, we actually saw over a corrective move. And of course, JP Morgan are betting, I think, on these two here because they said in 2024, they believe there's going to be an 8% pullback, close to a full correction of 10%. Something to keep in mind. Now, I promised you some big transactions. Let's talk about them. We had a monster one coming in on the Qs, and you'll notice there's a lot of semiconductor and tech stuff that we've bought up for a few days now. So the Qs, big read, big sell, probably was a sell at these highs. We also got one in Micron Technology, which is obviously this semi. Then we get another one in Microsoft, my favorite stock. Why would they even sell it? Come on. Who sells Microsoft? Come on, guys. Anyway, that happened. Number 6, we've got a big read there. We've got another big read in Amazon. We've got another big read in AMD. What you're kind of seeing here is huge reads across the board. And of course, even in an anti kind of Q hit, we've got another big read. So this is one going in the opposite direction. Basically, across the board, we saw a huge amount of transactions through tech. And what that is telling us is that someone is either building a huge position to go way higher, and maybe that will be what it is, or they've sold a little bit to see a little pullback here so that they can get in at cheaper price. One of the other ones I saw come through was treasuries. While we were getting close to those gap fills, we did see a large treasuries position. One of the bigger ones on this 3x bull, that is most likely either a profit take or a reduction so that they can look for some weakness. Everyone's on board that particular train at this stage. And while I'm a huge fan of treasuries, don't get me wrong, I do think that we were early to the party there. And at this stage, it's getting close to that late side, at least for the first supply being hit that we'll look at soon. Now, what was going on in the options world? Well, first up, we had fairly large options trade, 38 million versus 39.2 average, 55% calls, slightly more on the puts here. And in terms of retail participation, we saw 26% on the single leg side. So we are there. The retail traders are everywhere. And of course, that's happening. One of the stocks we spoke about in our Monday live stream was Salesforce, and it was going to be a benefactor of this whole AI revolution, at least initially. It seems like it did pretty well, 9.4% up on the session, and a lot of options trade value. We're also seeing some trade value come through solar, some trade value come through quite a few of the other stocks. And interestingly enough, we're also seeing a fair bit of transaction on things like Chevron as well. So that might be worthwhile watching when we're coming to the individual stocks. Here's where things get really interesting though. Rotation. Metals. Beautiful. Nice. We saw biotech. My biotech finally started to go a little bit live. And then of course we had a bunch of staples also doing well. What wasn't doing well was anything that was risky. And what I mean by risky is more gamma at this stage. So we've got clean energy, we've got communications, we have semiconductors, TAN, technology. They were really struggling behind. And at one point, they were down a little bit more. You can see here on 5 days now, the rotation out of semis is fairly significant. -1 versus gold at a 7% plus gain. Let's go into charts. Anything from effective yield? No, effective yield is not worrying us at this stage. So we'll go through all these indicators. RSP made a new high, I think kind of showing that rotation's full in force at this point. So what we're seeing is mid caps and possibly even small caps starting to play catch up to those higher tech stocks, which might be showing some signs of weakness here. And then we saw the bonds market still hold up. That's my bond indicator there doing okay. When we go over to treasuries, you can see treasuries got close to filling that gap, and it's actually kind of put in an island reversal towards the negative. So I wouldn't be surprised to see treasuries kind of drop a little bit here and then maybe rally later on. So that's going to be something that we're looking for. PCC or put call ratio, we basically have that in the middle, so not too many reads that we can get from that. And Dow Jones Transportation Average continues to hold within this range. So no weakness from Dow Jones Transportation and also no weakness from home builders. So again, that's looking like it wants to break to a new high. So what this is telling us is that if we do get this December sell, at least at this stage, the internals look okay in the markets, even if we think they look absolutely horrible. The charts are telling us it looks good. Now, where things get a little scary, a little weird, is, of course, central banks. So central banks did drop some liquidity over the last 2 days, both the Fed with the green line and the world central banks with the purple line, and both were down. And that can sometimes have a little effect on, in particular, it seems like tech at this stage. Then what about copper? Really good. We've loved copper on this channel for quite some time. I'm loving copper at the moment. Nice break. Want to see that thing go higher. I'd like it to go into my yellow lines. 3.9, maybe 4 for copper would be pretty sweet. And the US dollar did rise back up. So that was a great day trade if you managed to get onto that one. It's not out of the woods yet. I mean, basically, we still have significant problems when it comes to what's going on with the dollar. It's still making a series of lower lows and lower highs. And only on the small time frames was it bullish. I would say that it hit into a pretty decent supply. I expect some consolidation here from it. And when you take a look at the weekly as well, the close is going to be quite significant. So how this weekly closes, we'll come back to it and we'll look at the dollar as of Friday's close. Make sure to subscribe because the dollar will be an important one to watch. We'll also be watching gold very closely. Of course, we are bulls here on the channel on gold. We have been for months, so that's been good. And at this stage, we just want to see the weekly close. So we'll update on that. I don't really know what it's doing on the small time frames for now. I'm interested in the weekly close. Let's move over to oil, another one. Now, this one came up, didn't quite hit the alert where you'd be starting to say more bullish, and then rejected pretty hard. I'm still neutral on oil. I can see why bulls may want to buy around here. We've had those dark pool transactions coming through for some oil stocks. Possibly it's accumulating a position, so you could look at some oil stocks on the charts. But yeah, at this stage, this is kind of where the buyers are, and the sellers have been around 79.50. So maybe a channel style play from it. Tesla didn't do very well into its Cybertruck event. I'm not sure how good the Cybertruck is. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Did you like it? Did you think it was horrible? Is it good? Is it built well? I don't even know. I don't even know how they build it. The thing looks like it's incredibly hard to mass produce, which I think is a problem Wall Street are seeing with it. But it did come back down. So the stock is still holding that trend line. And really, that's the only thing we've got, this little miniature trend line here, small time frame, little bit of bullishness. I guess you could set an alert above these wicks if you wanted to see some maybe momentum slingshot trend if it was to come through. Break below, though, this little wick and, back down to 230, I think would be where we go. Biotech is improving. So, of course, this is something we've spoken about for some time. This was one I brought up in our Market Masters Club, and the reason why was it had that really nice island reversal, and it had a pretty good session. At one point, it was up quite a lot more. So again, there are different markets at the moment within markets, because you look at semiconductors, looks kind of nasty. You've got that shooting star down, you've got that rejection, got that possibility of at least getting a gap fill. It does look like we've got a rotation out of tech, and that's where those December stats may come in. Maybe we're going to see the weakness at the start, into strength in the middle, into the late. Bitcoin, it's still floating around at these highs. So basically with the crypto universe, it's still bullish until proven otherwise. And you can see it's still making a series of higher highs and higher lows. That is the classic melt up, that one. So it just keeps doing the same thing on repeat. The Russell 2000 held its own. It's in rotation. It's in some type of sideways market. Remember, this is burning time. So an easy way to think about it is when you have some type of movement like this, now a lot of people would always assume that's going to be a sell or something. Really what it's doing is it's resetting indicators. So if it does boost out, that's fine. It has reset indicators. It has had shorters in it, and then it's moving towards the next squeeze. So don't assume you have to have a pullback, but you do often need to burn time to get everything back in line. And that's what's happening in that case, at least at this stage. Now the Qs were weak, but of course we do need to be very scared of the initial rally, because of course, what is that? It's a big wick. So that is the problem. But the NASDAQ was the weakest, or one of the weakest across the board. So I think if there's going to be selling, it's kind of in here or 16K. So if we're going to see those weaker December stats play out, I'd like to see it stay under the 1650. So that's something we're looking at. We did tap into our first alert to show day traders and scalpers that they might be looking at a small amount of weakness in what has been an incredible melt up. And it's really our first read in a very long time for this. So let's find out whether it can happen. Of course, this is a very interesting point here for the NASDAQ right now, considering the stats. The S&P was a much weaker read. We also tapped into our alert, which was underneath this low, but instantly rallied it back up. Now, it's kind of sitting where it needs to find weakness right now. That was a fairly strong recovery. And what I like to look at is the real market, because of course that's where the big volumes are going through. So when we go and have a look at the daily, it's another one that rejected, then it found a big rally through it. And we know the equal weighted market, which is the RSP, that also was breaking to a new high. So the problem is that S&P 500 is not tech. It is everything. So because it's so many different sectors, we've got strength through a lot of those sectors. And that's what we saw in the Dow as well. So if you look at the Dow was absolutely slaughtering all of those shorters. Look at it go. I mean, it just absolutely just clamping down on the shorts, which have been increasing and increasing and increasing on this Dow. And it's no wonder you're trying to short it. I totally understand, but you can't do it. It's melt up. And this is that classic big move that usually liquidates people. Sometimes there's two in it. And it goes like twice, liquidates them off, and then it falls off. But yeah, that's a melt up into an absolute classic, huge move to punish all of the sellers. Unfortunately, if you haven't practiced the risk management, if you're using CFDs instead of options for your shorts, that can be pretty problematic. And yeah, that's a It's a very aggressive trend. The DAX is another classic, very aggressive trend. Gets into, no doubt, a very key zone. We spoke about it here, but we couldn't see enough weakness in it, and it just didn't present, and that's the problem. So at this stage, where could the DAX stop? Well, it could be 16,400 plus before it even stops at this stage. So we do need to be aware of that. Anyway, at this stage, US 500 is pretty interesting chart, although the weekly will be the key point. So we'll look at that as we close in on December. And of course, we will also be watching the NASDAQ and the Magnificent Seven and those stocks, because at this stage, it could be that rallies actually are met by sells. I'm not a huge fan of going against semis usually because it's the best market sector, but they're the only ones that are really showing weakness in this market at this stage. All right, what else news do we have? Well, we do have Jerome coming out. Could he be the catalyst? ISM manufacturing PMI coming through, and Fed Chair Powell speaking at 11 a.m. New York time. So make sure to be on top of that. Next week's going to be big. Weekly closes are coming in. I'm excited for those. And make sure as well to subscribe to the channel, and of course, subscribe to the VIP free weekly newsletter. I'll have 5 charts. I've scoured thousands, and I think they may be defining the week. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye for now. See ya.